Okay, good morning, everyone. This is Steve Bertjens. I'm the state biologist with NRCS out of the state office in Madison. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about our Monarch Wildlife Habitat Evaluation Guide. Most of you know that any time that we are working with a producer and wildlife is a primary or secondary concern, we are required to run some type of assessment. Many times we refer to them as habitat suitability indexes, or HSIs, but generically they're called wildlife habitat evaluation guides. And the Tech Center has developed a WIG to, we'll abbreviate that WIG, to evaluate monarch habitat. The interesting thing about this WIG is that in addition to its primary function of telling us if the resource concern exists, it also is a decision tool. And I will warn you ahead of time, if you look at the entire narrative of the Wildlife Habitat Evaluation Guide for Monarch, it's 19 pages. It's a little bit cumbersome, but what we have done is we've developed a data sheet that more or less eliminates the need for you to memorize this 19 pages. And so that's what I'm going to go through today. So I said, don't be intimidated by the 19 pages. We'll talk about the data sheet. And most specifically today, we're going to talk about how to fill out this wildlife evaluation guide in situations where you have an incident that requires it. And I will say also, this is a pilot year for this, so if you do run it, we're looking at getting comments from you on that. I will also say we know there's going to be some glitches, so headquarters is allowing us a lot of leeway this year in utilizing this tool. So just keep that in mind. There will be edits for FY17. So I'm going to get started with just a little bit of biology on the Monarch. Basically, why we're at where we are, the overwintering populations of monarch in Mexico has been reduced significantly, and President Obama signed a memorandum with the President of Mexico that both countries will work to protect and improve populations of monarch butterfly. So that's created within federal agencies a lot of new programs related to monarch, and NRCS we have quite a few of our own that we'll talk here about a little bit more. So just to give you a little bit on the life cycle of the monarch. You know, the adult seen here is on, that's butterfly milkweed. Has that orange flower to it that's very distinct. They lay the egg, and then larva turning into the caterpillar. Then the pupa forms into its chrysalis, and we start the whole cycle over again. So this is just showing this a little bit about the different stages of the monarch. The egg is very distinct. The vast majority of monarchs lay their eggs on common milkweed. Matter of fact, the lipid testing that they conduct in Mexico, any of the butterflies that they find that die, they pick them up and they conduct lipid testing, and they've found that 90% of the monarch butterflies had common milkweed in their system. So we know that common milkweed is by far the most utilized milkweed. Obviously, they will use marsh milkweed, they'll use butterfly milkweed, but since the common milkweed tends to be so much taller in stature, it's an easy target for them, and it's definitely their preferred plant. So this just shows a little bit going from egg through the instars. This is a pretty gaudy caterpillar, and if you ever watch them, you'll see that predation is actually quite high. Not that they all might be digested, but in the process of a bird finding out that they not only taste, they don't taste well, but they're poisonous, that they may kill them. So fairly high mortality rate. And this is showing a little bit more of the overwintering in Mexico, but the breeding generations, they only live 2 to 6 weeks. So it's a very interesting migration that they go through. If you start in Mexico, where they overwinter, those monarchs make it to Texas, Mexico, or Texas, Oklahoma, some of the other southern states. They lay their eggs, and then basically what we end up with in Wisconsin is 4 to 5 generations later, as they get here, with that very short life cycle. But then the last generation has to make it all the way to Mexico. So two things there: they need to fuel up before they leave. So we have a very large interest in the nectaring plants in the fall, so that they can fuel up and get all the way down there. And then obviously we also need that milkweed component. So that there's both. When we look at this, you can see from the chart, there's both the western population and eastern population. The western population actually overwinters in California.
This is a conference call, I'm not.
So basically, where we got, where we're at right now, there was a petition from several nonprofit organizations to list monarch butterfly as threatened, and so that's why there's the work that NRCS is conducting, other federal agencies. There's been an agreement that petition will basically be shelved if the government agencies can show that there's progress being made and populations are recovering. So it's in our best interest, it's in farmers' best interest to do everything we can to get this population on the rebound, so that we don't need to list it. So a lot of the what is believed to be much of our issue is, prior to glyphosate-resistant crops, we had milkweed in crop fields. We had all kinds of milkweed, and it was definitely a weed that producers wanted to eliminate. So as we came around with glyphosate-resistant crops, we pretty much took care of milkweed on the agricultural landscape. So now, we are certainly looking to get milkweed in any area we can to provide that breeding habitat. So here's some of the data. There's one study estimated a 58% decline in common milkweed across the American Midwest between 1999 and 2010. So that's where we're at in the Midwest. And so, it's believed that even little pockets that we can create are going to be very useful, whether that's roadsides, whether that's plantings we do in agriculture. So NRCS is our program. It's the Monarch Butterfly Habitat Development Project. And you're familiar with this. We have EQIP funding this year to kick this off. And we have many other programs that will be coming in the future with some RCPPs that were funded. And we're just going to be learning more about those in the near future. So the strategy from NRCS's perspective, there's $2 million available to the 10 core states. And in addition to the Midwest, in those 10 cores, Oklahoma, Texas, CFP, there is no targeted funds yet for CFP, but we do have a PLT, well, it was the old PLT 15 scenario that there is an enhancement within that, so there isn't, we can utilize that for a Monarch Butterfly. WRP, there's $2 million available throughout all the states, and Wisconsin already had to submit for that funding, so Wisconsin was approved for funding for Monarch on WRP sites, and so that's the first funding that's come to the state. This map just shows the distribution, the Midwest region that we are in, and what they call their central feed and grains livestock region. So just the areas broken up. Just talk about the WEG. Like I said, it can be a little bit intimidating. It's 19 pages. Right now, for NRCS folks, this is located on our SharePoint. Charlie will get this on our field office technical guide by the end of the week, so non-NRCS folks can access this information.
Thank you.
So there's basically 6 steps within the WEG, and the first step is develop a base map. You may do this in Toolkit. You may just print out an air photo and write on it. But the key here is to just kind of identify like areas that you have. You'll notice on the map they have areas that are out. Those would be areas if a producer had cropland. They say, well, I don't want to do monarch habitat on cropland. You can simply write in out and just kind of identify the areas they're looking at, lump those as much as possible and come up with an acreage. And then you can use your own modifiers. There's definitely nothing that's required. You can use an A for agriculture. You can use a P for pasture if you like. But then kind of link those up into what we call an assessment area. And you'll hear that a lot, an EA, an assessment area. So if you have several brome fields and they're all fairly consistent with cover type, you can just call that all one assessment area. And you can do the same for pasture. Forest is not an eligible land use, so if you had forest, you could list that as out. Farmstead is an eligible land use. They may or may not want to do that. So this is just a suggestion. It's not a requirement that you can make your base map, kind of help the landowner with some planning. Then we're going to walk through this determining future conditions, a little more about determining your planned habitat, and then document decisions. So basically the 3 steps, step 2, step 3, and step 4 are all placed on the data sheet that we're going to talk about. And the data sheet is 8 pages versus 19, so it's much more concise. And basically, this is a little hard to see, but in the end of the data sheet, you will come up with a monarch plan conditioned, and you'll get your benchmark, and then you'll get your planned habitat condition, just like we do with HSIs right now, where and the same formula is used as we always do. If you get a 0.5 or greater, that means the resource concern is being met. So that is an eligible application to move forward. If it's less than 0.5, that means the resource concern is not being met, and then we can go ahead and contract to meet that resource concern. And so they've made it easier in that instead of playing with the numbers, they've just used poor, fair, and good. So what we're shooting for is that good range, which is going to be 0.5 and greater. That's what we want our planned condition to be. So that's that's what we're coming up with. There is an applied habitat condition rating. We hope down the road that we'll go back and remonitor these and see if the habitat we put in actually did what we wanted it to. And that's one of those things that will definitely, that's voluntary, but hopefully we can do that down the road. So so the WIG, the whole data sheet, the good part about this is the assessment we're going to talk about. If your land use is crop, or if it's monotypic grasses, and those monotypic grasses can either be introduced or native, or if it's brush, you do not have to complete the entire wildlife habitat evaluation guide. You only need to go into the data sheet and check the box that it's crop, monotypic grasses, or brush. And then, and we'll go into more detail on this, but then the decision matrix is there on what you can do. So, and you know, this is going to probably cover the vast majority of the applications we have is going to fall into that, either crop or monotypic grasses. So we may not be running the WIG a lot, but in the future, obviously, you know, there's going to be a role for CRP in this. We already talked about WRP, and where we have that existing cover, that's really, some of these other programs is really where this WIG is going to be beneficial. So within the step 3, we're doing the evaluation of benchmark conditions, and so there's several parts to the wildlife habitat evaluation guide. The first factor is an insecticide risk condition. Then we have a weed management risk condition. And this shows it a little bit more. And we also then have a milkweed density, and we have a forb cover, and forb richness. And I will say that forb is specific to Monarch forbs, and we will, that list of Monarch forbs is on the NRCS SharePoint, and we'll also get that on the Field Office Technical Guide. So this is just showing where you would enter your benchmark for your insecticide and weed management risk, and we'll go through an example of this. And so when you conduct, if you need to conduct if your land use is prairie, or it's basically if it's not crop, brush, or monotypic grasses, then you need to go out and run transects, and we call those a belt transect. And what the data sheet has, it has that data that you can record right in here. And so you'll see this term ROP, and the ROP is the representative observation point. So that's the point that you're going to pick to run your transect. And so I'll show this visually in a slide coming up. So basically what you're going to do within that ROP, you're going to count milkweed, and then that's also where you're going to do your forb diversity and your forb count. Within that belt transect, so the belt transect is 72.6 feet, and then within that you will conduct 3 of these 6x6 plots. The full 72.6, that's basically by 6 feet, and if you pretty much just put your arms out on each side, that's about 6 foot. So what we'll be asking is you walk that 72.6, and then you count all the milkweeds within that area, and then you document that, and then you do the same. Then you pick out 3 areas within that 76 feet to do your forb assessment, and that's on a 6x6 plot. And so that's where this is recorded. And we'll talk about this a little bit more. So like I mentioned, then you're both doing a richness, which is a percentage, and then an individual count. of the forbs itself. And in the end, you will get this benchmark rating. And just so you can see on the formula, you'll notice that the milkweed factor is multiplied by 5. So that's telling us that is 5 times more important than all the other factors. So obviously we know common milkweed is the key here. So that's so milkweed will certainly drive your score. The selected alternatives, this is our kind of our decision matrix part of this is as you go through here, you can select the selected alternative, and like I said, we'll go through that in more detail, but this is part of the decision matrix.
Okay.
Under the insecticide risk condition, you would document what you had. In this case, if it's treated with insecticides, your benchmark would be a 0. And then the decision maker would have to agree to do 125-foot pesticide-free buffer. Otherwise, we would basically consider it as out. So the buffer is important. And if you look into the WEG, it says a pesticide-free buffer. But since there's flexibility this year, and the NRCS 595 standard actually has criteria that indicate that it's positive to not have weeds in a buffer area because it would attract insects to it, we're just saying that it needs to be a pesticide-free buffer. So if you had a pasture and the pasture, let's say it had some forbs in it, had some milkweed, and so you can't call it monotypic, and you're running the wildlife habitat evaluation guide here. If it's treated with insecticides, your benchmark would be a 0, but then the landowner would have to check this and say that they were going to have a 125-foot buffer, and that buffer could either be part of the cropland or part of the pasture land, but you need to have that buffer included there for the pesticide-free. It doesn't have to be herbicide-free. And then below there is your weed management risk condition also. And once again, so this does state pesticide-free buffer. I can't correct it on this particular one, but you'll see it's corrected on the example that we'll do. We talked about the planned evaluation. So that's what I have for the PowerPoint. Any quick questions before we move on to the example? Okay, I just have an example farm here with 2 fields that I evaluated over the summer. And the field in the middle that you see with the place mark 1 and 2, 5, 6, 9, 10, that's a monotypic brome field in CRP, and but it does have a lot of milkweed in it. So what I like to utilize in conducting these assessments is, if you have an iPhone, you can download an app. It's called Bad Elf. It's a free app. And then if you have a georeference PDF map, you can download that to your iPhone, and using the Bad Elf app, you can go out and put in these place marks. And it works real well. Basically, when you're out there using the app with your PDF map, you're walking around, you're the blue dot walking around the map, just like your blue dot when you use driving directions. And so what I like to do is, so that I can pick points, when you're in the field, oftentimes your eye draws you to what you're looking for. And so this isn't necessarily a requirement, but this is how I utilize the iPhone to help me hopefully pick sites that might be a little more random. So I put these points in before I went in the field. I knew this field, so the problem with doing it ahead of time is, like I said, we're looking for a ROP, a representative opportunity, a representative observation point. Knowing the field ahead of time, I know it was fairly uniform. It's monotypic brome. And so when I went out in the field then, this was my starting point. And so I just grab my iPhone, I start there, I measure off my 72.6 feet, and I conduct my belt transects. And then why this is important is that in the future, if we do go back and monitor these, then we have that exact point, that GPS point. And many of you also have the GPS receiver to go with the Bat Elf app. That obviously makes it more accurate, but if you're getting cell phone reception, you don't necessarily have to have it. But I think that's a nice tool for us to be able to figure out what our applied is going to be in the future. So this is just kind of how I laid it out. If you look through the WEG, it says we need to have 3 belt transects per assessment area. So I have 3 in each of these fields. I will say they are, like I mentioned earlier, we have a lot of levity for FY16. So the Tech Center is saying that if we have a field, a small field, and it's fairly uniform, and you feel that just by doing a walk around, you can get a better grasp than doing these belt transects, that they're going to allow us to do that for this year. I find the belt transect though is a fairly easy way to get the data, and so those of you that might have ran this before over the summer, some of the Farm Bill biologists ran last summer, ran some of these. This is a much easier process. So this is what I would utilize, and for these, so for each field I'd run these, we'd run the 3 belt transects. So let's just, this middle field is the brome field, so let's run an assessment, wildlife habitat evaluation on that. And so this is the data sheet that we talked about, and you can put your operator name in there, the planner, and then if you're running the belt transect, you check the box, and then your assessment area, I just called it B1, and kind of put a modifier brome, put your acres in there, and then if you're not using an iPhone, and this is another nice thing with the iPhone, you don't really need your location, but if you're not using your iPhone, then you would want to put your latitude and longitude in here, compass bearing. The WEG says that if at all possible, run your transects north-south. So this is where you would put your information in. There's some notes that you can, I just put brome field with common milkweed. So the first part of this assessment would be if we had crop monotypic grasses or brush. Then we could just check this box, and what the data sheet is saying is that if you have these, your benchmark is poor. So we don't have to run the WEG because we know those conditions give us poor. So we know the benchmark, it's less than 0.5, so this is going to be, this can proceed without a WEG and proceed with a contract. However, when you look at the boxes within the selected alternatives, and this is a decision tool, once again, this says that there will be the 125-foot pesticide-free buffer. We realize that that's going to eliminate a lot of contracts, and I guess I definitely need to hear back from all of you because the only way we can get this changed is to tell headquarters that we're really losing a lot of good contracts. So for now, we have to deal with this 125-foot buffer. So if they had a crop field, and within that crop field, they wanted to go and plant some habitat, they'd have to have a 125-foot wide buffer. Now that could be you know, it could be maybe a hay buffer that they don't spray with insecticide. It could be corner beans that they don't spray with insecticide. It could be a woodland that creates that boundary. But your 125-foot buffer needs to be between any area that's treated with insecticide. And then the same thing goes for the monotypics and brush. And then they can decide what if they want to implement a planting, a field border. In most cases, people are going to utilize our conservation cover 327 because we have a specific pollinator payment scenario that, and some of these mixes can be quite expensive, so that probably makes the most sense. So automatically your plan rating is going to default to good because you agreed to do one of the activities within the selected alternatives. And then obviously we can't do the applied rating. That's, you know, we're talking 3 years down the road for the applied. So back to our example of our brome, we would jump to step 3, determine benchmark conditions. So our first, the insecticide risk condition, in this case, it's CRP, or if we just, you know, if it came out of CRP, and we're just going to say that, you know, it's not getting any insecticide because they're using it for wildlife habitat. So it's not treated with an insecticide, which would be 0, or if you had just a portion of your assessment area was within 125 feet of pesticides, you get a 0.3, but neither apply, so we give that a 1 for this field. Plan score, then obviously we're whatever we decide to do for management, we're going to come up with a 1 also. So this kind of shakes out here. So we're going to say that they are spraying the area with herbicide. We'll just assume that there is some Canada thistle and things so they are treating with herbicide. So if that's the case, then you get a 0.1, and then our plan score, we're going to assume afterwards they are not applying any herbicide, and that will give us a 1. Now the one thing that we don't have to count in here in the plan score, they are certainly allowed to apply herbicide to get the new habitat established. So we're not going to count that against them. The other thing we're not going to count against in the benchmark score is that they're just doing spot spraying to control noxious weeds. We're not going to call that. Now if they're broadcast spraying with a large sprayer, we can't count that. But if they're simply going out with a hand sprayer and hitting noxious weeds, we're not going to hold that against them. So then, our first factor there with the insecticide, the weed, then our next factor that we move into is when we actually run the evaluation, and we run the belt transects. So you'll see here from that map that I showed you, I've got this has the data for the 3 belt transects, referred to here as the ROPS. And so I've got that. I had my when I had my my iPhone, I had the points 1 and 2, I had a point 5 and 6, and I had the 9 and 10. So I walked through, I did my 72.6 by 6, so I stretched my arms out and I walked that 72.6, and in 1 to 2 I found 4 stems per acre of milkweed. The next one I found 6, and then the third one I found 5, and so that's an average of 5, and so 5, basically the way the calculation comes out, that's 500 per acre. So if you're getting 5, you're getting 4, it's 400 per acre. So we go over to the benchmark score, and we see that If we're 301 to 500 stems per acre, that's a 0.8. So enter that in there, and then we assume, in this case, they want to do either a prescribed burn or they want to do some planting to get this up to a 1. So our plan is 1. I will say that the plan score is planner discretion. Basically, there's really no set number that you can put in there. We're leaving that up to the planner to decide what the plan score will be. So then within the assessment, we come to the section where you would do your plots within your transect, your 3 plots looking for forb cover, and so here within our ROP, the first one when we went through and we evaluated the I will say this field had very little forb cover in general, but we know it's got milkweed, and so milkweed is it's actually both a source of nectar and obviously it's the host plant for them laying eggs. So so we go through, and what I found for numbers was anywhere from 3% to as low as 1%, for an average of 2.2% monarch forbs cover. This is just, like I said, it's a 6x6. It's a visual observation, and if it helps, some folks prefer to break that down, a little smaller. Maybe use, as we do with prescribed grazing, they use a hoop or something like that. If that helps you, you can do, you can base that calculation too on percent if that helps. We just 6x6 we figured was fairly easy, but it's a visual observation. So in this case, we said it was rare. There's not a whole lot of monarch forbs. It's primarily monotypic brome. So we got a 0.2 because we're between 2.1 and 5%. We're going to assume that they're going to do a planting, and our plan score is going to be 0.8. And then we have to do the VFR is the average number of monarch nectaring forb species within the assessment area. So you can see we came up with a very low number, and our average was only 1.11, but as long as it's between 1 and 2, you get a 0.3. The nice thing is here too, the decisions tool, if you the alternative says the score is between 0.3 and 0.5, decision maker will implement one of the following. So they could just do a prescribed burn. They could just do they could certainly do a planting. Also keep in mind, there are these alternatives within this, but we really can't make decisions until we get to our final score. So although this information is here, we really got to get to the final score before we start making those. This is just trying to help walk through the decision matrix. So then we get this auto calculates, and you can see the calculation here. And so our benchmark rating here is 0.58. So that's greater than 0.5, so this field would not be eligible for a contract. And I can say, that this field, as much milkweed as it had and as many monarchs that were there, I would say that's correct in that to disturb that site probably didn't make a whole lot of sense. Even though it was primarily monotypic brome, there was so much milkweed available that it was a really good site, and so it's not going to be eligible for funding. So that's our first example. You can see our plan score very high. So, but in this case, like I said, all those alternatives really don't matter because we have to get to this benchmark rating, and we're above 0.5. So, going back to our other map. So now we're going to look at this second field, which was a CP2, and it does have monarch forbs in it, but you'll see it has a much lower rate of milkweed per acre. Not a lot of high diversity, which most of our CP2s aren't extremely high diversity. So, so let's look at an assessment for that. So once again, we go through the data sheet. Whatever we labeled our assessment area, I just put P1 for prairie, the ROP labels, and then we can skip through because we can't call it crop, monotypic grasses, or brush because we have forbs. Our insecticide risk condition, because it's it's in CRP, is basically a 1. There are no insecticides. Not treating it with herbicides, so that's also a 1. So we get 1s for both of those first, and then we do our transect, and you'll see that in our transects, the number of stems of milkweed was very low. We only had 1 in these, and so that 1 basically tells us we've got 100 stems per acre. So if you're between 10 and 200, you're a 0.3. So that's our rating on there. And then the planner can decide through looking at the alternatives how they will mark that for planned. Then and then here you can see our forb richness went up. Some of the plants that some of the common plants that we might have in CRP that are monarch that are high quality for monarch forbs. Yellow prairie clover, the goldenrods, showy goldenrod, stiff goldenrod, black-eyed Susan. So a lot of our, there are quite a few common CRP forbs that do meet the list. Culver's root is another one. So you'll look at the list, and there is any of the milkweeds. So in this case, we had, as we did our 6x6 plots, we found that our percentage of nectarine forbs was falls into that 5.1 to 15%, so we give it a 0.3. And then when we're calculating, went through and calculating our average number of monarch nectarine forb species, we were greater than 3.5, so we give it a 0.8. And like I said, you can track all your data there. So going to the calculation, this field, our benchmark rating is 0.45. So it's less than 0.5, so we can contract this. So this, to a lot of folks, you know, you may look at that and say, well, geez, you had a fairly, you had an okay prairie, and you had a brome field, and the prairie gets in, but the brome doesn't. And as you will see, because that factor of 5 for the milkweed is really what determines it. So we can go ahead and contract this, and our planned score is 0.9. So that was a very brief run through of this, but I am happy to take any questions at this point. Penny, are you able to unmute folks so that they can ask a question over the phone?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, well, I just unmuted my phone, so it's working for you.
Excellent.
Yeah. So I had to step out because I was taking care of a customer with a sign on a contract. But when we give it the scores, you were giving it ones. What determines what level of score we put on that?
As far as the plan condition?
Yes, I missed that.
Okay, and my point was that that's really a planner discretion. In most cases, if the landowner agrees to do the full planting, the 327 pollinator planting, we're just going to make an assumption. We're going to assume that's a 1. Where you may not give it a 1 is if they have fairly decent cover, and under the decision matrix, for example, if we go to milkweed, one option under there is if you've got between 300 and well, I guess anything greater than 300, you do have the option to just do a prescribed burn. So if you did a prescribed burn, you're probably, like I said, this is planner discretion, but that's where I probably wouldn't give it a 1. But if we're doing a planting, we're just going to assume we're going to get that 1. But
So
like I said,
so 1 is the maximum you give it.
Exactly. So
okay.
The HSIs, I don't know whoever developed it, but and I didn't explain that, but basically when we're talking a 0.5, that means you're meeting 50% of the potential for Monarch. So if you've got a 1, that basically means you're meeting 100% of the potential. So wording it that way, you might look at it and say, well, geez, I'd never give anything a 1, and that's fine. That's the part we're leaving up to the planner. But you will see, and I do have canned seed mixes that are on the SharePoint right now, and you'll see that those are when you look at our pollinator planting, it's 10 seeds per square foot of warm seeds and grasses. It's 30 seeds per square foot of forbs, and so that's a lot of forbs. So we can get some pretty high quality plantings. The other thing I guess I forgot to mention, but we are required for NRCS purposes that when we're creating the mixes, a minimum of 60% of the forbs must be from that Monarch forb list. And then a minimum of the total seeds per square foot of the total mix, 3% of that total mix must be milkweed. So in most cases when we're looking at a requirement of 40 seeds per square foot, we're looking at least 12 ounces of milkweed per acre. So it's a lot of milkweed. And I know a lot of folks say, that seems like a lot of milkweed, and say, well, we might find out in the future, yeah, maybe we were putting more milkweed on than what we needed. But for now, to ensure that we're getting good monarch habitat, we have to abide by that 3%.
Thank you.
There is a question I see, could I clarify between pesticide versus insecticide use? Is herbicide okay or not? It's a good question. And like I said, the confusing part here is that if you look in the WIG, the tech center always says pesticide. And so we can all agree pesticide is anything that kills. So if you're killing weeds or you're killing insects, that's a pesticide. What we did ask for in Wisconsin, because of the way our 595 is worded, we asked to just consider the insecticide use for that 125-foot buffer, and they agreed with that. So, so the herbicide, so for your 125-foot buffer, that just has to be insecticide-free, not herbicide-free. But when we're talking about, obviously, if you have to run the wildlife habitat evaluation guide, when we get into that insecticide, that's talking about insecticide and herbicide on that specific assessment area, not talking about the buffer itself. So so yeah, and then the question has been, so how do we document that someone won't apply pesticide in that 125-foot buffer? Basically, I've talked with programs, and we're basically just saying, hey, if they agree to it, we're going to take their word for it, that they are going to have that pesticide free. Also, one thing to keep in mind, because there really is no such thing as non-treated seed for soybeans and corn, we're not going to consider the seed treatment as an insecticide. At some point when there is an option, but right now, other than organic corn, there's really no option for untreated seed. So, so we won't consider the application of the treated seed as being an insecticide application. There's also a question of the information using the iPhone, and I will certainly get that out to everyone on the steps. There was a question previously that BADELF is a free app that's available to anyone in the general public. What we did find, there was a stipulation that if you were a government entity, that you had to have a license. So I assure you, NRCS folks, NRCS did purchase the license, so we can utilize BADELF. Also, Kent Pena is working to develop a PDF app that we can put on our phones so that when we're out using the BADELF to record our information for the data sheet, that the data sheet, we can have that on our iPhone so we don't need more paper with us. So I'm going to be working with Kent on that, so hopefully that's going to be available very soon also.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Well, what's this one? This one's just that. This one is just that upper field, or just this, these two fields? Oh, yeah, yeah. Okay, and this is just this one. Yes. Okay. Thank you. And like I say, if I redraw it. Well, that's close enough. Thank you.
There's one question. Will this wig be used for future? How do I get down there?
There's one more there, and then I'm done. I missed two, so that must be.
Okay, I just stretched it out.
Like Florence and stuff in there too. Okay, okay.
So the question is, will this WEG be used for future Monarch projects and the RCPP? Yes, it will be. We are still waiting to hear on the RCPP. There's going to be a meeting coming up that we're going to learn more about that. But more or less, and also in working with Brandon, it appears that FSA will also, when they have programs in the future regarding Monarch, that they will also adopt the same procedure. So, so for USDA purposes, we'll be using this anytime Monarch is listed as a resource concern.
Hey Steve, this is Brisky.
Hey Brian.
I missed that teleconference last week, but the question I have is, let's say we have a producer that has an alfalfa field and he sprays leaf hoppers, so he doesn't have that 125-foot buffer, and he wants to do this Monarch thing on the edge of the field. Okay, you're following me?
Yes, I am.
And the way the screening tool is set up, again, this is the first time I've looked at a lot of this stuff, so poo on me if I'm behind. But so he wants to screen high, and say he has that to meet this high screening, he has to have that 125-foot buffer, right? So he needs to say he wants to make that habitat 150-foot wide, okay, on one side of the field. So just bringing the program aspect into it, do we plant a 150-foot strip of this Monarch cover and we're good? Or do we got to only plant the milkweed on 25 feet?
So there's a couple, I'll see if I can answer it, but there's a couple different things to take in consideration. And for today's purposes, I didn't talk about ranking and screening, but there is a screening question that is the planting, 125 foot, basically asking if you've got a treated field on one side, is it at least 125 foot wide, or if there's treated fields on two sides, is it 250? So we do have that screening question that we have to deal with. So the planting, we know it's got to be a minimum of 125 foot wide. And then this buffer is a whole nother factor that we have to deal with. Not a screening question, but what they're talking about is no matter, so we know our planting width has got to be 125 foot wide, but what we would need if that's next to a cornfield, we need that 125 foot buffer. Now, like I said, if they said, well, we're not going to treat that 125 feet of that alfalfa next to it, that'd be fine. But we need to, that buffer is what we're dealing with. I'm hoping in the future, we don't have that option this year, but I'm hoping in the future that, we could contract them for maybe a field border to allow them to establish that buffer in addition to the Monarch cover that you would utilize through 327.
Why can't we do that right now? I'm looking at the program guidance on the SharePoint, and it's got 386 as a supporting practice, or why can't we just do 327 and just do one without a milkweed in the mix and one without?
Yeah, my understanding from the tech center is that for FY16 that the only cover we can establish is if we're putting cover in with milkweed in it. So we're certainly hoping to get that changed for FY17, but and the dollars are very limited this year, we only have $50,000 available for EQIP for this sign up. So that's my understanding. Now whether programs can get that waived for us or not, I think Ryan might be on the phone. I don't know, Ryan, do you have any input into that?
I don't. I'd have to refer to Matt. He's on another call right now. We'll ask him after this, Brisky.
Yeah, you get where we're coming from though here, right?
Yeah, I certainly do, Brian. But I guess we can ask, because what the tech center has told us, there's a lot of flexibility for FY16. But initially, they did state whatever planting we do needs to have milkweed. But we could certainly ask for the exemption. I mean, they gave us the exemption on the herbicide-free buffer, so maybe it's possible. Good question.
Thanks, guys.
Well, we are out of time. Certainly, if anyone has any questions, feel free to give me a call, fire me an email. Like I said, this thing is hot off the presses from the tech center. And as you're running it and you find glitches, let me know. Those of you that have run habitat suitability indexes in the past know that after we've run them in the field, sometimes we find certain instances where we're not funding good projects, and then we can make those adjustments. So we'll definitely, if you find those, let me know, because we'll want to get those adjustments made for FY17.
Steve, could I put in a comment about the CSP?
Certainly.
Yesterday we got a national bulletin for the new CSP sign up, and in it they referred to a supplement for the PLT15, the pollinator enhancement, and the supplement is specifically for Monarch. I've emailed it out to the APSs and the area arcs if anybody is interested in it. And it's specifically targeted for monarchs, so if they are still just looking at honeybees, I would use the old guidance. This one here refers to a few of the things in the WEG, but there's some differences as well. And the WEG is not required for CSP, but again, the success is measured as 500 stems per acre plus 2 targeted nectar species, although it still looks for that 3, 3, and 3 requirement. So I can see that as maybe you have a site that meets a 3, 3, and 3, or maybe it's a 1, 3, and 3, and there's no milkweed stems, or they're limited. You could use this enhancement. It asks for an insecticide-free buffer of 25 feet around it. That's another difference I've noticed from this. And that's all I have on that right now. It's brand new, but we can use that for the 2016 general sign-up. And the dates again for the Monarch Initiative are June 10th for sign-up, July 16th for ranking, and Matt has said that he's real close to getting the ranking released. He just has a few things to address, and that will be out. And then July 30th for obligations. So we are following the 3rd batching date in EQIP for the Monarch program right now. Again, this one falls under Matt's initiatives. If you have questions, follow up with him. I'm just filling in for him today. And that's all I have.
All right. Penny, are you going to send us off?
Sure. Well, thank you, Steve, for a great presentation and everyone's participation. And again, this is Penny at Wisconsin Land and Water, and I need to say that this go-to meeting is provided in part by the State Interagency Training Committee, and also we put out a monthly newsletter with training opportunities. If you ever want to get in that mailing list, just let me know, or if you want to let Charlie or Steve know, they know how to get a hold of me if you don't know who I am or where I am, but I'm at Wisconsin Land and Water. So anyhow, thanks everyone, and next week on Wednesday we'll be having Judy Derricks talk about the basic conservation planning and talking points. So have a good day everyone. Thank you.